we begin our journey in a landscape that feels profoundly foreign to the soul. Look closely at this image of modern life, and you will see a portrait not of human activity, but of constant, jittery reception. We scroll endlessly, drawn downward by gravity, the artificial pull of more content, more comparison, more fleeting judgment. This perpetual feed is often termed the infinite scroll, and it has become the primary gatekeeper to our peace. It offers us the illusion that happiness is merely one swipe away, hidden in a perfectly filtered image or a notification chime. Yet, as we continue to chase this ephemeral validation, where are we actually going? We mistake exposure for experience and consumption for contentment. The ancient sages understood something fundamental. True tranquility is not found by looking outward, but by establishing an immovable point at the center of oneself. The scroll itself is a powerful psychological current, pulling us away from the solidity of our own internal reality. It breeds what I call the anxiety of manufactured inadequacy. We are bombarded with the highlight reels of other people's lives, the perfect vacations, the flawless careers, the effortless joy, all meticulously curated and presented as the baseline human condition. And when we measure the jagged curve of our messy, authentic day against that polished, artificial mountain, what remains is a residue of shame and the nagging whisper, not enough. This continuous external looking is fundamentally exhausting. It demands that we allocate massive amounts of precious mental energy merely to compare asterisk. We are spending emotional currency on things that belong entirely to others, or worse, to advertisers and algorithms. Think back to the Roman Forum, a place built for genuine human exchange, real debate, visible labor, the shared weight of public life. There was messiness there, contradiction even, but the motivation was usually rooted in reality, in commerce, civic duty, or deep philosophical inquiry. It had boundaries, a beginning and an end that acknowledged human limitation. The modern scroll knows no such boundary. It is designed to be ceaseless, creating a perpetual state of almost enough, ensuring we never reach true satisfaction, because the next piece of content, the slightly better life, the slightly more successful person, is always waiting just one swipe away. To break free from this tyranny, we must first learn an act of brutal self-recognition. We have outsourced our sense of worth. Our internal citadel, that quiet space where meaning resides, has been rented out to a glowing rectangle, and while the temptation is overwhelming, the dopamine hit when the notification arrives, the momentary rush of belonging when we receive likes, we must treat this compulsion not as a habit, but as an active form of self-betrayal. Stoicism does not advise us simply to turn off our phones. It teaches us something deeper, that the phone itself is merely a mirror reflecting where we choose to project our attention. The scroll represents the seductive belief that peace is an external resource, a podcast, a purchase, a new relationship status. This thinking pattern leads to what Epictetus would call misplaced assent. We assenting to the idea that things outside of us can dictate how we feel about ourselves. The freedom, the profound, difficult work of self-reliance begins when we recognize the gravitational pull and make a conscious choice to resist it. It is not a fight against technology. It is a deep, meditative argument for human sovereignty. We must remember that our judgment, our internal interpretive lens, that remains inviolable. Whether an event arrives through a physical encounter or a pixelated feed, the power to determine if it causes us distress, if it defines our value, rests entirely within the borders of the self. This is the moment we pause and perform a mental inventory. How much energy have I spent today on things that were fundamentally outside my influence? On reacting to headlines written by strangers, or on measuring my achievements against someone else's filtered best moments? This energy, the frantic scrolling, the immediate emotional reaction to external stimuli, is not ours to spend. It belongs here, in the quiet expanse of our own internal conviction. The goal is therefore restorative withdrawal, a disciplined retreat from the noise, so we can hear the faint but insistent sound of our own reason. We are seeking not an end to external pressure, for life will always present us with worthy struggles and necessary interactions. Rather, we are building an impermeable core, an inner locus of control that does not depend on validation signals. It is the profound realization that while the world outside may be chaotic, constantly demanding our attention, our capacity to respond rationally, calmly, and with integrity remains eternally ours. We start by looking up from the screen, recognizing the quiet dignity of simply being present in one's own skin again. If the first challenge was mastering the internal gaze, turning away from the dizzying parade of other people's perfect lives on a glowing rectangle, then the second task is far more rigorous, for it demands we turn our attention outward to the chaotic reality that surrounds us. We have learned to guard our minds against the manufactured inadequacy of comparison, but much of modern stress does not arrive via curated feeds. It arrives through demanding emails, volatile headlines, and unexpected changes in fortune. These external currents buffet us ceaselessly, threatening to drag us back into that desperate chase for external validation. We believe that if we just achieve enough, or earn enough praise, or control one more variable of our life, the perfect job title, the impeccable relationship status, then peace will finally settle upon us. This is the illusion, the profound misunderstanding that happiness can be purchased with accomplishments or guaranteed by circumstantial success. But ancient wisdom offers a navigational chart far simpler than any corporate ladder or social media metric. It presents the great compass point of human resilience, the dichotomy of control. The dichotomy of control is perhaps the most fundamentally practical tool available to the thoughtful mind. It requires us to draw an imaginary, invisible line in the sand and learn, with surgical precision, what lies on either side of that boundary. On one side are all the unpredictable forces of the world, the actions of other people, the careless words of a colleague, the capricious whims of a market, the global crisis far beyond our immediate view. These things, by their very nature, belong to the realm of chance and outside power. To spend energy fighting these currents, to railing against them as if they were personally slighted us, is merely to sign up for exhaustion. It is arguing with reality itself. On the other side of that invisible line lies everything that belongs solely to us: our judgments, our intentions, our reactions, and the sheer direction of our attention. This inner hemisphere is our sovereign territory. It is the only place where true power resides. Consider this simple equation. Events happen, a presentation fails, a relationship fractures, bad news breaks. But what causes distress is not the event itself. It is the judgment we immediately apply to it. The world merely presents raw data. Whether that data registers as a catastrophe or a manageable inconvenience depends entirely on the mental filter through which we process it. Seneca reminds us that it is often our expectations that wound us, far more than reality ever could. We are so conditioned in modern life to expect instant gratification, seamless outcomes, and constant affirmation. When those expectations collide violently with messy reality, we suffer the emotional shockwave. The sheer effort required to maintain these flawless expectations, this ceaseless self-policing against disappointment, is what drains us dry, leaving us brittle and anxious at the slightest setback. This insight leads us to a profound philosophical shift, recognizing that freedom is not achieved by eliminating challenges, but by drastically shrinking the scope of what we care about. We must actively train ourselves to distinguish between what is truly up to us, the quality of our character in response to adversity, and everything else. This mastery demands mental discipline, a constant internal check on where we choose to expend our limited reserve of emotional energy. Are we agonizing over the fact that the economy may decline? That is external. Can we control it? No. But are we willing to spend this afternoon learning 3 new skills and speaking with genuine kindness to every person we meet regardless of their mood? Yes, that is entirely within our jurisdiction. The insidious nature of modern life, however, is that it keeps subtly blurring this line for us. The endless news cycle bombards us with crises, a political upheaval here, a public health scare there, making the external seem infinitely large and utterly uncontrollable. Our collective attention economy trains us to panic. We become adept at reacting immediately, at assuming immediate danger because the feed demands it. But the disciplined Stoic does not react. The Stoic observes. He observes the headline, acknowledges the fear that rises in his gut, but then methodically asks himself, what portion of this turmoil is truly dependent on my voluntary action? What judgment here can I challenge? This practice transforms us from reactive recipients of external chaos into proactive designers of our inner peace. When we accept the constraints of human fallibility and global unpredictability, that people will fail, markets will turn, technology will mislead, we remove the emotional leverage these things hold over us. We strip away the cosmic requirement that life must function like a carefully curated movie trailer, always climaxing with perfect success. Instead, we embrace the natural asymmetry of existence. Effort precedes reward, and sometimes the greatest act of self-mastery is simply to endure the dull friction of the unexciting day, knowing that our peace resides not in avoiding difficulty, but in meeting it without internal revolt. The process is meditative. It is less a grand revelation and more 1,000 tiny moments of recalibration. When frustration bubbles up, perhaps because a task is harder than anticipated, or because someone has disregarded your boundaries, do not engage with the emotion immediately. Pause, breathe deeply, and then mentally ask, is this problem primarily an external occurrence, or is it my judgment about that occurrence? By shifting the locus of blame and responsibility back onto the self, we instantly reclaim authority. We realize that nothing can genuinely harm us unless we grant it permission to do so through our own fear and expectation. The true art, therefore, of being unbothered is not radical indifference. It is radical acceptance, coupled with uncompromising ownership of one's inner life. It is the disciplined commitment to recognizing that while the river of external events may sweep through us, bringing turmoil, disappointment, and sudden change, our own mind remains an archipelago of self-governance, eternally untouched by the tides of others' expectations or the dictates of fate. We learn, finally, to draw our borders not around perfect circumstances, but around unshakable principles, virtue, rationality, and the profound liberty found in directing only our attention in the pursuit of a serene existence. We have become masters of anticipation and connoisseurs of dread. Our modern anxieties are often structured not by actual events, but by hypothetical narratives, elaborate, dramatic movies playing only in the silent theater of our own minds. We spend vast reserves of precious energy rehearsing worst-case scenarios, imagining job loss years down the line, never securing that perfect relationship or facing a public failure so profound it alters one's entire trajectory. This constant mental audition for disaster is exhausting and ultimately entirely pointless. Stoicism offers us not the illusion of blissful ignorance, but something far more pragmatic and perhaps even more jarring: the practice of confronting our fears head on. We call this Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils, or as some might dismiss it, negative visualization. This is not a melancholic exercise designed to invite dread. Rather, it is an intellectual act of mental armor plating. It is about voluntarily allowing ourselves to think about what could go wrong, so that when the hypothetical disaster inevitably strikes reality, it lacks its terrifying novelty and emotional shock value. Think of anxiety as latent energy, a contained, restless fire within your chest. Premeditatio Malorum does not extinguish this fire, it simply subjects it to rigorous analysis. It asks you to sit down with the catastrophe and treat it like a poorly written play that you must fully analyze to understand its weak structural points. What if you lost everything? Not just money, but status, connection, purpose, all at once. The initial thought is usually a gut punch of panic. How could this be possible? And then, after the initial tremor passes, we force ourselves to move past the emotion and ask structured questions. What would I do with that reality? Who would I call first? What skill have I cultivated in my current life, even seemingly minor ones, that would become vitally necessary? The aim is not to find panic. It is to locate resilience. It is to catalog your resources, both external and internal. The greatest psychological trap here is the belief that suffering itself is an insurmountable force. We imagine falling into a void of pure despair. But what we are actually fearing is not the event, the job loss, the critical word, the market dip, but the feeling of helplessness associated with it. By running through these worst-case scenarios, we begin to dismantle the myth of inevitable catastrophe. We learn that even in extreme decline, a segment of agency remains. The ultimate disaster is rarely singular. It is usually a convergence of solvable setbacks. You are always capable of responding. This practice requires courage, the intellectual fortitude to look into your deepest fears and treat them with dispassionate objectivity. It shifts the terrible weight of what if from an undefined terror to a structured, manageable problem set. We take the amorphous dread that clings to us throughout our lives, treating it instead like arsenic, not as poison itself, but as an element that can be contained, neutralized, and understood through chemistry. The inherent humor in this process is realizing how much psychic energy we dedicate simply to avoiding imagined pain. Our emotional reaction often constructs the worst-case scenario into something monstrously larger than its mere factual possibility. We are poor storytellers when it comes to our own suffering, giving dramatic sweeping arcs to what are usually a series of awkward inconveniences and minor annoyances. Consider the criticism you fear most. Let us premeditate that moment. Someone reviews your work harshly. They use words like derivative, uninspired, or flawed. The first reaction is defensiveness, burning hot and immediate. How dare they? But if we sustain the exercise, what do those words actually mean asterisk? Do they represent objective truth, or merely another person's emotional state, their own unexamined insecurities projected onto your efforts? We strip away the venom of judgment. The criticism itself becomes inert data. It is information about the work that needs refinement, information about their perspective that you can now label as opinion, and information about yourself that you can acknowledge without collapsing into self-pity. This disciplined approach to dread does not teach us cynicism. It gifts us radical clarity. It teaches us that our vulnerability is often a luxury we afford ourselves. The luxury of assuming the worst outcome requires no skill, only fear. But by facing those potential losses systematically, we build an inner scaffold of confidence. We do not become immune to pain, but we become deeply resistant to panic. The power here lies in recognizing that the actual event holds significantly less coercive force than our imagination does when unchecked. By inviting the worst-case scenario into the light of day and subjecting it to rational scrutiny, we transform paralyzing anxiety into merely complex problem-solving. We move from being victims of possibility to active managers of potential reality. This is not just psychological coping. This is an act of sovereign mental self-defense. We have traveled far from the scroll's blinding light, and we have begun to delineate the boundaries of control. We learned that much anxiety is simply a misplaced focus, an attempt to wrangle the unpredictable currents of other people's desires, market fluctuations, or geopolitical headlines. But even with the great tool of the dichotomy of control in hand, there remains one final, subtle mechanism through which we suffer: the misfiring synapse between event and judgment. The tragedy is that we are experts at blaming external variables, the demanding boss, the fickle audience, the unpredictable algorithm, when the true battlefield resides entirely within our minds. Consider a moment of pure neutrality. Nothing has happened yet. There was no mistake made, no slight uttered, no promotion denied. Yet, in the space between stimulus and response, a cascade of internal narrative error can begin. We are wired for drama. Our ancient brains misinterpreted mild inconvenience as mortal threat. This foundational impulse means that our emotional suffering is rarely an accurate reflection of reality. It is instead a byproduct of poorly managed expectations. This chapter demands us to become radical forensic psychologists of our own minds. We must stop treating feelings, anger, crushing disappointment, desperate anxiety, as immediate evidence of objective truth. Instead, we must treat them as merely signals, inconvenient, often disproportionate warnings requiring rigorous inspection. The core principle we are confronting now is this: it is not the event that harms us, it is our appraisal of the event. The rain falling outside is simply water hitting pavement. The criticism delivered by another person is merely a set of words accompanied by an inflection. Both events are objectively neutral. What transforms them into sources of genuine distress, into burdens we carry like chains, is the story we immediately attach to them. Think of your mind as a perpetual commentator, always broadcasting judgment and certainty about the world's fairness and its predictable injustices. That commentator often lies, fueled by sunk cost fallacy and comparison culture. It whispers narratives like, "This happened because you are fundamentally lacking," or, "If this outcome is undesirable, it must therefore be terrible." These are not facts. They are dramatic hypotheses generated by emotional urgency. The task at hand, then, is to build a profound cognitive pause, to recognize the precise moment that event transforms into perceived disaster. This pause is where freedom resides. It is the gap between what asterisk is asterisk and what we asterisk assume asterisk it means for our worth or our future peace. When faced with an irritating slight, instead of collapsing immediately into the self-flagellating narrative, "They don't respect me. I must have done something wrong," we interrupt the stream. We pause and ask a simple, devastatingly simple question. Is this event inherently bad, or am I calling it that? This philosophical interrogation is not a defense mechanism designed to minimize pain. It is an intellectual tool meant to deflate power structures built upon emotional certainty. By forcing ourselves to look at the raw input, the actual words spoken, the measurable setback, the physical discomfort of waiting, we strip away the dramatic coloring we have applied. We realize that what we call tragedy often dissolves into mere inconvenience when viewed through the cool lens of objective assessment. The drama is thus relocated. The conflict moves from the external world, which remains wildly chaotic and unpredictable, to the interior space between our ears. Here, within this quiet chamber of judgment, is the only point where we can genuinely exercise sovereign control. We are not merely reacting, we are deliberately choosing how to interpret reality. We train ourselves in a systematic deconstruction of perceived outrage. When feeling anger, for example, instead of immediately attacking the source of that emotion, the person who offended us, we ask, what is my immediate judgment about their intent? Are they trying to hurt me specifically, or are they operating under their own set of flawed circumstances and misjudgments? This shifts the focus from victimhood to observational understanding. It becomes less about them against me and more about a complex human dynamic requiring thoughtful assessment. This appraisal discipline is rigorous. It requires acknowledging that disappointment is often a mismatch between an ideal expectation and reality, not a flaw in reality itself. We are disappointed when the scaffolding of our anticipation, the perfectly smooth career path, the constant stream of validation, the effortless resolution to conflict, is disrupted. The pain comes from the failure of prediction, and the solution lies in accepting that life is inherently messy and unpredictable. The most profound shift this chapter demands is moving from the emotional imperative to the rational inquiry. We must stop treating our personal peace as a fragile bubble of flawless conditions and instead begin seeing it as a structural integrity built by consistent thought patterns. When we treat every perceived misfortune, a missed deadline, an awkward conversation, unexpected bad news, not as confirmation of personal failure, but simply as raw data points for processing, the intensity diminishes. We are liberated from the assumption that life owes us comfort or predictable harmony. This disciplined detachment is not coldness, it is profound self-empathy exercised through logic. It is giving ourselves permission to observe our own emotional reaction without becoming enslaved by it, to watch the curtain of judgment rise and fall, to see the illusory smoke dissipate into the clear air of unbiased recognition. That ability to identify the faulty narrative as something separate from the event itself is perhaps the single most radical act of self-mastery we can practice. If previous chapters taught us to recognize the traps, the relentless pull of external validation, the seductive chaos of assuming control where none exists, and the danger of judgment misfiring in a moment of stress, then this chapter is about building the structure. It is time to build the inner citadel. The concept itself is profound. It does not mean being detached from the world, nor does it suggest becoming cloistered or indifferent. Instead, think of the citadel as something fundamentally internal asterisk. It is the core self, the mind, trained and fortified against assault by circumstance. It is your sanctuary of judgment, a space that no market crash, no harsh critique, and certainly no trending news headline can penetrate. The Stoics taught us that the true nature of man's freedom is not found in changing his circumstances, but in mastering his reaction to them. We are not rebuilding walls against stone or storm. We are reinforcing mental architecture. This self-containment requires tremendous daily effort, a continuous maintenance, routine far more demanding than any single act of endurance. This citadel stands on the unshakable foundations of reason and virtue. It is built by practicing rigorous self-interrogation. When anxiety strikes, when the external world screams its demands into your consciousness, the man within the citadel asks a simple, powerful question. Is this within my sphere of control? If the answer points outside to another person's whims, to yesterday's mistakes, to the trajectory of human politics, then the alarm bells must be silenced. The process is fundamentally counterintuitive. We spend so much energy attempting external fixes, changing the boss, changing the algorithm, changing others' minds, that we neglect the most powerful leverage point available to us, the single private jurisdiction of our own ascent. Our judgment is not a passive reception of reality. It is an active, volatile decision. And therefore, in moments of chaos, the only truly sovereign action we can take is to suspend that initial, automatic judgment. Imagine life as a constant barrage of inputs. The perfect photograph on social media, the abrasive email from a demanding colleague, the sudden silence after a heated argument, these are all inputs. The unfortified mind reacts immediately, labeling the input bad, unfair, insufficient, and that label is the emotional detonation. The event itself was merely a flicker of reality. The Citadel trains us to implement what Epictetus called the disciplined withdrawal of assent. We pause before reacting. Before we assign value or blame, we create space, that moment of psychological stillness, that breath taken between stimulus and response, is where true freedom resides. It is in that gap that judgment ceases to be automatic emotional outburst and becomes a conscious act of reason. Reclaiming the Citadel means internalizing this pause until it becomes muscle memory. It means treating your peace not as a gift granted by favorable circumstances, but as a personal possession, requiring daily vigilance and practice. We must become our own chief guardians, capable of observing the turbulence of life from a safe distance, recognizing that the storm exists outside the gates, but its power to breach you depends entirely on what you allow within. The enemies of the inner citadel are subtly disguised as necessity, but everyone else is doing it. But I need this promotion. But if I don't check my phone, I will miss something crucial. These false necessities promise connection or security, but deliver only dependence. They whisper that your worth resides in validation metrics, in likes, salaries, follower counts, metrics which are inherently uncontrollable and thus fundamentally unreliable. To live from the Citadel is to embrace a profound self-reliance. It is recognizing that when the external scaffolding collapses, when the job goes away, when the carefully constructed social life evaporates, when global systems falter, the foundational structure of your character remains intact. This core substance cannot be seized or depreciated. This journey back to self-containment requires us to recalibrate our expectations downward in a radical, almost frightening way. We must expect adversity, not to dwell on it morbidly, as we did with Premeditatio Malorum, but simply to anticipate its asterisk possibility, asterisk. By acknowledging that discomfort, disappointment, and friction are not anomalies, but predictable components of the human condition, they lose their shocking capacity to derail us. The result is a kind of profound inner equilibrium. We do not become cold or cynical. Rather, we become resiliently temperate. Our emotional response curve flattens out over the vicissitudes of life. The small irritations that once sparked intense frustration are now merely noted as inconvenient. The major disappointments are met with steady acknowledgement, difficult but manageable. The citadel is not impervious to pain. A storm can certainly batter its outer ramparts, but it provides an unshakable anchor point at the core, the disciplined self capable of recalling its own primary jurisdiction. It teaches us that while we cannot control the waves of life, we have absolute authority over the depth of our own anchoring. This deep sense of self-sovereignty is perhaps the greatest freedom humanity has ever achieved or forgotten. It is a quiet revolution, this commitment to inner defense. It means building trust not in external systems or other people's perceived stability, but in the reliable architecture of your own judgment and character. It is knowing, finally, that even when everything around you is shifting into unpredictable disorder, you still possess one unassailable ground: the self observed by reason, remaining steadfastly within its private walls. We have explored the vast psychological landscape of control, learning where our true freedom resides within the judgments we choose and the reactions we permit. We've built the inner citadel, understanding that peace is not a reward for good fortune, but the diligent practice of mental fortification. Yet, in this modern era, where connectivity mimics community and comparison feels mandatory, the enemy persists. It wears the guise of shared experience, wrapped in perfect filters and endless feeds. This chapter confronts the single most pervasive source of modern anxiety: the inescapable urge to compare ourselves to others. The algorithmic reality presented to us is a masterpiece of curated highlight reels, a parade of achievements, flawless relationships, and enviable existences. It creates an exhausting illusion of abundance, subtly suggesting that our own unfolding narrative is somehow deficient by comparison. We scroll through lives optimized for maximum envy, feeling the phantom weight of inadequacy settle over our shoulders. This frantic comparison culture acts as a powerful siren song, drawing us away from our stable center and back into the murky waters of external judgment. The core mistake we must identify here is misunderstanding what constitutes success. We have internalized a toxic societal definition that self-worth equals visible metrics, that because another person's filtered morning coffee or career milestone appears superior on a screen, our own daily existence must be equally dramatic and enviable. This pursuit of external validation is not merely poor taste. It is an active surrender of sovereignty. It teaches us to measure the richness of our inner life against the glossy packaging of someone else's curated surface. Think back to the wisdom of the ancients who found their greatest victories in quiet discipline and character. They were not worried about whose garden was more aesthetically perfect or whose family narrative sold better online. Their focus remained relentlessly inward, on cultivating virtue, perfecting judgment, and mastering the self. This contrast is profound. The modern mind is programmed for outward visibility. The Stoic mind trains itself for internal invulnerability. How does one dismantle this ingrained habit of comparison. We begin by remembering that every single digital display is a performance, a carefully staged act designed to elicit specific emotional responses, usually admiration or aspiration. There is no raw footage, only the polished edit. The perfection we consume is almost always fictional, serving the underlying business model of attention itself. The Stoic countermeasure requires us to radically shift our internal metric system. We must train ourselves to value the virtuous progress, the sheer effort, the sustained diligence, the quiet moral improvement over the publicized outcome. Our true progress graph cannot be charted by comparing it to the alleged zenith of another person's life. It can only be drawn with honest introspection and dedicated self-examination. This is not about apathy or indifference, but rather a deeply proactive form of internal stewardship. It means redirecting the massive cognitive energy normally spent scrolling through other people's perceived triumphs toward examining our own commitments. Where are we neglecting virtue because we were distracted by a dopamine hit? Is our current goal driven by genuine self-improvement? Or is it merely the pursuit of external praise and visible affirmation? The antidote to comparison culture is disciplined singularity. It demands that we fiercely protect the boundaries of our unique journey. Every time the impulse arises to compare, to think, why are they doing better than me? Or when will my life look like theirs? We must institute a deliberate mental pause. We ask, is this measurement helpful? Does comparing myself invalidate my own effort? The answer is almost always no. We must redefine the meaning of enough to maintain integrity. Enough time for study, enough genuine connection with those physically present, and enough quiet space to listen to our own unvarnished needs. Comparison thrives on scarcity, the feeling that if others have something, we lack it. But when we ground ourselves in the Stoic realization of self-sufficiency, that sense of deficiency begins to dissipate. The discipline here is one of focused attention. It means realizing that time is perhaps our most precious and unrenewable resource. To waste that time fixating on someone else's narrative is a profound act of spiritual poverty. True wealth resides in the moment we are currently inhabiting, accepting its imperfections, acknowledging its unique difficulties, and finding meaning within its immediate boundaries. Furthermore, comparison often masks an underlying fear, the fear of not being enough. By focusing intensely on external perceived failures, we avoid looking at our internal architecture, our moral commitments, our character resilience, the quiet virtues that define us when no one is watching. The Stoic challenges this evasion directly. We turn the camera inward. We stop asking what others are doing and start asking, am I living according to my own deepest principles? Am I being diligent in my duty? Am I acting with courage today? This internalized scrutiny is far more challenging, yet infinitely more liberating than monitoring a public feed of supposed perfection. It anchors us back to the fundamental self. We are not defined by our achievements relative to a peer group. We are defined by the integrity between who we believe ourselves to be and how we conduct ourselves in reality. The journey back to non-comparison is therefore a radical act of self-authorship. We must willingly accept that our path will look messy, unsponsored, and profoundly uncurated. And this imperfection is precisely where freedom resides. To build an authentic life requires not the approval of the collective, but the quiet, steadfast assent of one's own conscience. That internal validation, that agreement between action and virtue, is the only currency that truly matters. It makes us masters of our narrative, finally immune to the tyranny of what if others were doing better. And we have spent considerable time dismantling external traps. We've learned to distinguish the mere event, the harsh word, the market dip, the sudden cancellation from our reaction to it. We know that suffering is not a consequence of life itself, but an architecture built within the mind, a structure of judgment erected upon shifting ground. But there exists a profound misunderstanding about what we are aiming for. Many hear the word Stoic and mistake true emotional discipline for simple numbness, a kind of intellectual detachment that requires us to simply stop feeling. They imagine a vacancy, an abyss where passion should reside. This is perhaps the most insidious misconception, because it promises the easy escape of apathy. The goal of Stoicism is not to become emotionless machines. It is far more vibrant and human than that. If our philosophy required us to sever ourselves from love or grief, then indeed we would all be perpetually bored. Our emotional spectrum remains intact. Compassion remains a guidepost. The capacity for profound sorrow still exists. What we are pursuing, therefore, is something vastly subtler. It is not the elimination of feeling, but the realignment of its authority. We seek to shift control from the passions, from those overwhelming surges of grief or rage that hijack our reason, back into the steady guardianship of our rational will. We want the emotions to be signals, helpful data points telling us about ourselves and others, rather than masters demanding absolute obedience. We must understand the distinction between being controlled by a passion, and experiencing an emotion. When we are gripped by rage, for instance, that feeling bypasses our reasoned self. It is immediate, hot, blinding. It dictates what words we speak, where our hands point, and how we approach others. In that state, we are merely puppets to the raw, unexamined impulse of the moment. The Stoic aim is not to delete rage from our emotional vocabulary. It is to insert a deliberate space between the stimulus and the response. It is to recognize the surge of anger as mere energy passing through us, acknowledging its presence without allowing it to take up residence in the ruling center of our being. This conscious refusal to be governed by immediate impulse is what we mean by resilience. This leads us to a concept sometimes misused: indifference. When people hear indifference, they think of apathy, of caring so little that nothing moves them, even injustice. But true Stoic indifference is not the resignation of the heart. It is the profound freedom gained when our self-worth becomes wholly independent of external outcomes. It is the wisdom to differentiate between what we care about virtue, character, reason, and what we are merely attached to status, approval, material comfort. Attachment creates vulnerability. It establishes external things as necessary conditions for internal peace. If your happiness rests upon a promotion or on another person's continued affection, you have given away the keys to your own emotional safety. The virtue of indifference, then, is not about caring less. It is about caring correctly. It means having an even mind, a steadiness that allows us to acknowledge hardship, recognize loss, and still proceed with integrity. It is a deep, settled calm that arises from knowing that the foundational pillars of your life are internal, untouchable by fortune or by malice. The practice required here is often subtle, requiring patience far beyond mere willpower. When we experience genuine difficulty, a profound relationship breakdown, a financial catastrophe, a public humiliation, the natural human tendency is to seek comfort in narrative. It shouldn't happen to me, or this proves I am unworthy. We are trained by culture to interpret misfortune as a personal indictment. But the indifferent mind observes this pattern without judgment. It acknowledges the pain of loss. Yes, it registers the sting of betrayal. Absolutely. Yet, instead of allowing those feelings to dictate its subsequent actions, instead of leading it toward despair or vengeful retaliation, it performs what we call cognitive detachment. It maintains a compassionate distance between the suffering self and the rational self. The objective is composure in complexity. Imagine being thrust into chaos, a sudden emergency, an undeniable failure. The unbothered mind does not pretend that everything is fine, but it refuses to let fear dictate its immediate next steps. It grounds itself by returning to simple questions. What do I know to be true right now? What is the smallest useful action I can take given these constraints? This shift from overwhelmed reaction to methodical assessment is the daily training ground for this virtue. The final measure of a Stoic mind, therefore, is not its ability to feel nothing, but its capacity to choose what it feels. It is that exquisite moment when you are faced with unbearable pressure or deep injustice, and instead of dissolving into predictable emotional chaos, you pause. You draw your breath, and in that stillness, you assert the authority of reason over the tyranny of impulse. This steady inner guard, this citadel built not of stone, but of disciplined attention, is the ultimate definition of true freedom. The modern day often feels like a race against an invisible deadline, a desperate scramble to keep up with the expectations of everyone else. We wake up not by choice, but propelled by a torrent of alerts, a phone pinging our attention from every direction, reminding us that we are perpetually incomplete, perpetually in debt, or perpetually behind schedule. This sense of urgency is perhaps the most insidious stressor of our age. The belief that peace must be achieved before we can feel worthy of it. But we know better now. We have learned that many of the stressors defining our lives are not external threats requiring us to fight them, but rather internal narratives, stories we tell ourselves about what those threats mean. And if the power resides in our narrative, then the greatest act of self-defense is simply refusing to narrate at all. This morning ritual is not merely a luxury. It is a form of cognitive armor. It is the first and most crucial moment of sovereignty we claim over the day's proceedings. Before the world has a chance to dump its chaos onto our consciousness, before comparison culture or unexpected demands can hijack our attention, we must intentionally draw a boundary around our inner self. We are not aiming for blissful ignorance. We are aiming for disciplined clarity. We are learning to distinguish between mere reaction and considered response. And the key tool of this morning preparation is Premeditatio Malorum, the careful practice of anticipating difficulty. To some ears, dread sounds terrifying, but when approached philosophically, it becomes an intellectual exercise in risk assessment. Imagine laying out a mental schedule for your day's potential difficulties. Not just what you plan to do, but what might go wrong while doing it. What if the critical email arrives before your best thoughts have settled? What if a colleague dismisses your careful planning with casual indifference? What if the news cycle presents yet another devastating headline? The goal of this mental rehearsal is not to invite fear. It is to diffuse its power through intellectual boredom. By running these worst-case scenarios through the rigorous logic of what would I actually do, we strip away their emotional novelty and their inherent shock value. We transform an amorphous, sprawling cloud of generalized anxiety, the kind that whispers vaguely in the pit of your stomach all day long, into a manageable set of discrete problems. Consider the loss of professional standing, or perhaps merely losing the energy you had earmarked for a meaningful conversation. The first instinctive emotional response is a sharp gasp of "this is terrible." But the disciplined mind intervenes. It pauses. It asks, is this event inherently bad, or is my judgment about its severity what makes it bad? By subjecting these hypothetical disasters to dispassionate analysis, by accepting that professional embarrassment is merely an inconvenience, and rejection is simply data point for improvement, we find a startling kind of freedom. This morning ritual requires us to assume the role of our own most disciplined editor. We are checking the draft manuscript of our day before any other person has read it. This means setting intentions, not just for action, but for asterisk mindset asterisk. It means deciding right now that when faced with unexpected criticism, your first reaction will be curiosity, not defensiveness. When overwhelmed by external noise, your first instinct will be withdrawal, not frantic engagement. The actionable practice is to ask oneself a series of questions. What are my non-negotiable core values today? If everything outside were failing my car, the market, someone else's mood, what internal virtue would still allow me to move forward? By identifying those immovable anchors of character, be it patience, diligence, or rigorous honesty, we build a metaphysical safety net. These virtues are unassailable because they exist entirely within the domain of our own choosing. This mindful rehearsal creates a crucial distance between stimulus and response. When we anticipate conflict, we remove its element of surprise. We realize that true panic does not come from the unforeseen event itself, but from the assumption that we have no means to cope with it. By preloading ourselves with contingency plans, not for physical actions, but for mental reactions, we diffuse the paralyzing power of uncertainty. It is a profound act of self-trust. We are telling the mind, I know what lies ahead, not because I predict every detail of fate, but because I have disciplined myself to prepare my asterisk judgment, asterisk, regardless of outcome. This discipline is the steady work of constructing that inner citadel. Stone by conscious thought, it reinforces the understanding that while life will constantly test our edges with unexpected noises and jarring demands, the deepest, most impenetrable boundary we possess remains firmly within us, the mastery over our own ascent. When we commit to this structured mental preparation each morning, we are fundamentally rejecting the culture of reactivity. We are asserting that our peace is not a commodity granted by external success or perfect circumstances. Instead, it is an actively designed structure, maintained moment by conscious breath and disciplined thought, ready to withstand the inevitable barrage of the modern world. We have spent chapters building a shield, a sophisticated armor, not of bronze or steel, but of pure reasoned assent. We learned that the battlefield for our peace is rarely outside us. It resides within the ceaseless echo chamber of our own judgments. Yet, even with these tools, honed the clarity of the dichotomy of control, the bracing practice of premortem visualization, the disciplined pause between event and appraisal, we still find ourselves exposed in the unpredictable arena of human interaction. Our inner citadel is strong against the slings and arrows of misfortune. But what of the verbal skirmish? What of the petty drama of daily communication? This chapter concerns the most subtle, yet perhaps most profoundly difficult skill, the art of non-reaction. It asks us to consider silence not as an absence, but as a profound action, not as a retreat, but as the highest form of internal power. We live in a culture engineered for immediacy, a world that rewards instant response, immediate opinion, and constant verbal participation. Our social wiring has become addicted to filling the void with noise, mistaking volume for importance, and engagement for genuine connection. The modern dilemma is this: we are constantly primed to respond, to argue back against a caustic remark, to defend our position online, to clarify misunderstood intentions. We view silence as weakness, a vacuum waiting to be filled by speculation or accusation. But the Stoic recognizes that the impulse to respond is simply an attachment to being right, an emotional investment in external validation through dialogue. Consider any argument, whether it unfolds across a dinner table or within the rapid-fire comments section of some global forum. The exchange inevitably moves away from the substance of the matter and into the realm of personal animosity. When faced with deliberate provocation, the casual slight, the barbed comment meant solely to wound, the relentless trolling designed only for attention, our instinct is to fight fire with words. The non-reactive individual understands that engaging in a debate based purely on insult or malice is not an intellectual engagement. It is merely emotional expenditure. It drains your vital energy into a well that has been deliberately poisoned by the other party. By speaking, even to defend yourself, you are still participating in the drama they wish you to inhabit. You are still granting their words significance. The true mastery here is to observe the impulse to speak, that familiar, hot surge of adrenaline accompanying injustice, and then to consciously veto it, to let the silence hold its ground. This quiet space between stimulus and response is where genuine freedom resides. It is an act of profound intellectual defiance against the expectation of continuous noise. How do we practice this withdrawal? First, we must identify the specific nature of the trigger. Are you responding to a factual inaccuracy, or are you reacting to the implied judgment of that inaccuracy? Often, the perceived slight has nothing to do with your character, but merely reflects the emotional instability, lack of self-awareness, or sheer boredom of the person speaking it. If you apply the dichotomy of control here, what portion of their poor judgment is actually up to you? None. The power of silence is twofold. It protects your internal state, and it radically alters the perceived dynamic in the room. When one party consistently refuses to meet provocation with equal measure, when they shout into a void that remains stubbornly quiet, the energy expenditure quickly becomes unsustainable for them. The emotional momentum transfers from you back to the source of the stress. Practicing non-reaction requires us to adopt the role of an immaculate witness. You are not merely listening, you are studying the patterns of another person's distress. Their comments, their heightened tone, their desperate need for your acknowledgement, these are data points, valuable for understanding human folly, but they do not require a verbal counterargument. This is where we confront the notion that silence equals consent. It does not. Silence can be the most robust form of agreement with your own internal peace. It is an assertion that your focus, your attention, and your capacity for self-governance are non-negotiable assets. They are reserved only for what truly matters to your ethical life. The art of non-reaction teaches us a quiet, profound dignity. It removes the desperate need for external affirmation, the validation that fuels comparison culture and endless scrolling. When you choose silence instead of reply, you are communicating volumes. I see your words. They do not require my participation in your drama. My peace is self-contained. This discipline shifts us from being participants in transient human chaos to becoming observers of it. We become detached reasoners, situated slightly above the fray. The goal is not merely to avoid confrontation, but to achieve a sublime indifference to conflict itself, a state where external verbal attack simply registers as background static, like the distant hum of traffic. It loses its ability to penetrate the self-contained core we have worked so hard to build. We have traveled far. We have learned the rigorous disciplines of the mind. From the volatile seas of external opinion, we navigated to the quiet sanctuary of our own judgment. We practiced spotting the manufactured distress caused by mere comparison, recognizing that the self presented online is merely a highly filtered performance, a carefully constructed myth built on validation metrics that will inevitably fail. And through it all, we unearthed the anchor principle, the dichotomy of control, the profound understanding that most of our anxiety stems from spending precious mental energy worrying about things that are simply outside the reach of our will, the decisions of strangers, the capriciousness of markets, the headlines written by distant editors. But knowledge, as history teaches us, is insufficient without practice. It remains a beautiful blueprint until it is put into daily use. This final chapter is not about mastering one more technique. It is about integrating them all, turning theory into the steady, quiet musculature of being. It is the discipline of sustained presence. If previous chapters were lessons in deflection and withdrawal, this chapter is a gentle return to what is immediately present. The simple, undeniable fact of this moment. We learned to preempt fear by inviting it to hold up the polished mirror to worst-case scenarios until they lost their frightening novelty. We practiced the cognitive pause before our natural reaction, took over the instant where we questioned if the perceived affront was actually a genuine threat or merely an inconvenience dressed in dramatic language. These tools, the pre-mortem analysis, the questioning of judgment, the resolute recognition of inner sovereignty, are not standalone survival mechanisms. They are threads that weave together into a single garment, continuous attention. The goal is not to achieve some peak state of permanent unbotheredness, because life itself is defined by movement and unexpected events. Rather, the aim is simply to become habitually watchful. Consider the profound weight we assign to our own attention. We scroll through endless feeds, letting external forces dictate the rhythm of our focus. Our peace becomes a commodity available only upon the next notification, the next viral headline, or the next compliment. This surrender of attention is perhaps the most insidious modern vice. It makes us perpetually reactive, always waiting for the next sensory cue to confirm that we are worthy, that we are safe, that we matter. The Stoics taught that true power lay in withdrawing assent, in choosing not to believe the premise that something must be difficult or bad simply because it happens. It is a withdrawal of judgment, an emotional veto performed in the immediate moment. When confronted with stress, when the tide of life threatens to pull us back into old patterns of panic and overreaction, we must remember this delicate mechanism. Stop, breathe, and ask only 3 simple questions. Was this event itself bad? Or is my interpretation of it what makes it so? Can I influence the external occurrence right now? No. The continuous practice is less an intellectual exercise and more a return to sensory humility. It means noticing the weight of your body on the chair beneath you, the subtle rhythm of your own breathing expanding and contracting, the most reliable metronome in existence. These anchors pull us away from the frantic mental traffic jam of yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's hypothetical catastrophes. Living this philosophy is a constant refinement of boundaries. It means cultivating an internal citadel so sturdy that when the winds of criticism blow, they simply rattle against the outer wall, but cannot breach the core. When the pressure to perform in career, in relationships, on social feeds mounts until you feel brittle, it means recalling that your value is inherent. It requires no external confirmation. Your worth is not a fluctuating graph dictated by likes or promotions. It is stable and self-generated. The beautiful realization of this integrated wisdom is that unbotheredness is not the absence of emotion, nor is it the promise of an easy life. It is simply alignment. It is the constant state of being fully present with reality as it is, imperfect, messy, unpredictable, while simultaneously refusing to grant any external chaos the power to dismantle your inner composure. It is choosing reason, moment after moment, over comfort. It is selecting self-governance, even when it feels profoundly uncomfortable. The discipline shifts from merely analyzing anxiety to embodying stillness. To live within that still point, finding freedom not in avoiding difficulty, but in mastering one's response to it. This quiet vigilance, this steady breath of presence, is the ultimate form of resilience